Okay, so let's continue on with our second pass of our prototyping. And once again, this pass is just about adding some visual interest and a little bit of variation to our level. So we left off in room 2. We added some columns. We changed the height of room 1. So let's just keep moving forward with more changes like that. So I'm just going to keep adding these columns to break it up. Something like that I think is good. I like to put columns in the corners, and then I might even go back and, add some columns in the middle of the wall if I feel like the repetition of these wall pieces is still too much. But it's also possible that you may not know that until you get the textures on them. So we'll just proceed like this for now, and keep in mind that game design, game development, level building, all of this is an iterative process. So it's totally fine at any point to come back and decide you need a little bit more in your levels. And don't forget to be playtesting this early and often, not just for functionality, but also for, getting a feel for these pieces in the room and how it flows. Obviously, these are not what our final pieces are going to look like, but you get the idea. Oops. Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing with the pit in room 3 as I did in room 2, which again was I extended these walls down, and I did put a bottom in it, and I left it, the floor of the pit colored black so it appears bottomless. So let's do the same thing in this room. And I'm going to change to unlit mode just to see these pieces a little better, although it is probably worth putting some more lighting in. Okay, I have everything selected around there. I'm going to make sure my snapping is at 100, and I'm going to press Alt and move this down. And one more time, let's do it twice. And then before I put in the floor, I'm just gonna play from here. Now, because this room is a little bit wider, I think I'm gonna extend these walls down a little bit farther, just because it's a little bit easier to see down into it when it's this wide. So I think I'm probably gonna do this probably 2 more times. I think that sounds good. So holding Alt, losing my gizmo, looking around for it, finding it, and moving things down. So 2 more times. Before I put the floor in, let's just play from here one more time. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You'd have to, really be on the edge here. And again, we're gonna put the floors in, so let's come down to here, grab our floor piece, and just start moving it into place. I think that is right there. Looks good. I'm going to open up the details panel and change this to the black grid we made. And I'm also going to make sure I move this to room 3. And I believe these pieces here yeah, these are from room 2. So we forgot to put these in our folder, but no worries. We'll just put them in there now. Okay, just holding Alt and duplicating these out. 2, 3, and 4. You can select all of them by holding Shift and clicking, and then holding Alt, and we can duplicate multiple at the same time to speed this process up a bit. Okay, so let's see how that looks. We're gonna come up back to our level. We're gonna play from here. And I think that looks pretty good. Can't really see the bottom there because of the lighting. Let's look from over on this side. I mean, if you see this like sort of light flickering happening on the edges of my screen, these are just some artifacts, I believe, from the new Lumen lighting system. And I believe once you build and run the game outside of the editor, I do not think that that happens. So I think that is just sort of a visual in-editor bug, but I don't believe that will actually cause us any problems on the final build of our game. Okay, so that pit looks really good. I'm just gonna come in and start doing some more columns in this room. Again, I'm not super worried about lining these columns up perfectly with grid lines because they are supposed to be breaking it up, not matching the grid necessarily. So for this area underneath the catwalk here, I do want some support beams that look like they're, you know, holding this up, rising out of the floor. So I'm going to use the columns for that as well, and I'm just going to stack them. So I'm just going to duplicate a column here, put it right in the middle of the catwalk, and then probably out, let's say about here, and I'm going to drop it down so it's underneath, and I'm just going to do that a couple times. I don't believe that I need to go all the way to the floor necessarily. Just because when you actually play the game with the lighting, you can't really see the bottom of it anyway. Now, that may change if the lighting situation in this room changes, which it undoubtedly will, because these are, again, just work lights, as I've said many times. But for now, I'm not going to put geometry where I don't need it necessarily, so I think this is sufficient for the time being. We could always, you know, duplicate a couple more down later. So let's play from here. Okay, so then we'll have some, you know, columns sort of supporting this structure. I'm just tweaking the placement a little bit for aesthetic reasons. And then probably the same thing over here, even though it is, you know, attached to the wall on this side, we can still add some more support columns. Again, the more time you spend on this sort of block out phase, and like the more things that you add into it, probably the better it's going to look. Most people, when they're starting out with this kind of stuff, their designs just aren't very detailed, and the issue is when you go into asset creation and development, you know, there's not a lot for the artists if you're working on a team, for instance, to work from, so it will leave your levels feeling empty. So again, this is just a tutorial. This, for the purposes of this course, I'm not, you know, going to be filling out this level with lots of, you know, minute props or anything like that, but you get the idea. This is just to give you the basic understanding so that you can take these principles and really run with them and flesh out your levels in a much more detailed way than I am doing here. Getting a little Z fighting right here. Just snap that back. My goal here was to have a little bit of an overhang on this platform, but I'm getting a little bit too much Z fighting, so I think I'm actually gonna walk this back a little bit. Yeah. And you'll start to get a feel for what works and what doesn't, and with snapping and your levels and things like that as you continue to build out more and more levels. You could also use what we talked about with the slight scaling, as long as you're not going too far over, if you wanted to get that sort of overhang effect without the columns. That is another way to do it. You just want to make sure that things line up, or that you're covering, you know, any unsightly sort of gaps or seams as you go. Make sure that these are actually reaching the full height of the ceiling. So I'm talking about having little like gaps right here. It can be hard to see in unlit mode, so make sure you're switching back and forth, you know, fairly often, and that will help you see where your gaps are. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, you know, fleshing out a bunch of geometry down here where we're not even going to see it. Just extending it far enough down until it fades into the darkness. But that is largely design dependent. So let's take another look at this room. If we come into it here, we have our columns, our floor of our pit is finished out, but I feel that the ceiling is a bit low in here actually, because it's feeling quite small, and I want this room to feel sort of large and grand. So what I'm going to do is to raise this, a portion at least of this ceiling up, probably just by 1 wall unit, so just by 4 meters. I had to think about that for a second. So the other reason I'm doing this is because based on my level design document, I know I'm going to have those like falling blocks over this section, right? So when we play from right here, well, there's not really anywhere for them to fall from. The ceiling needs to be higher. So it's aesthetic, but it's also a functional choice here to give those blocks a little bit more clearance. So I'm just going to select everything here. And probably keep going all the way around, right? Because we need the blocks to be across this whole piece. So let's do at least these ones. if not just the whole thing. Okay, so my snapping, I'm going to set it to 100 to make this easier and go 1, 2, 3, 4 meters. Okay, I'm going to play from here again. I think that's going to be a little bit better. So now we just have to fill in our gaps here. So let's come into lit mode, and I'm going to start selecting this northern wall here. Alt drag to move it up. Same thing here, just with the rotation. Alt and rotate. And I'm leaving the ceiling a little bit lower over the entrance platform because I really want to emphasize like sort of the height of it here and the depth of it here. I want to emphasize like the verticalness of this space. And that can be achieved if you push, you know, as you're moving through, if you push from a area with a low ceiling into an area with a high ceiling, it really just emphasizes the height of it. So, yeah, let's continue this. This one actually needs to go this way. Oops. I'm going to add another light in here just so I can see a little bit better what I'm doing. I'm going to push the attenuation radius. I'm also going to push the intensity just to light this area a little bit better. Okay, so we need to extend these columns up by duplicating them. Let's do that right here. I'm sort of on the fence if I want to leave this area low or high. I think I'm going to leave it low for the time being, but I might change it later depending on how it sort of feels when I'm playtesting. Oops. Let's lower our grid snap a little bit to get a little bit of overhang here. Three, 4. And then we're going to want to cover this Z fighting this flickering as well. So we're going to do that with more columns. Let's put one sort of overhanging this. Let's duplicate up. Let's duplicate sort of by rotating. Align this. Looks pretty good. Two, 3, 4. And then same thing on this. We're just going to extend this down a little bit. I increased the lighting over here, so obviously you can see where it ends. So, you know, depending on what you want your lighting situation to be like, you either need to keep extending these down, or, you know, change the lighting when you're done working in this area to be back to that sort of dark, sort of gloomy thing we had going on. Something like that. And something like that. So yeah, obviously you can spend a lot of time sort of fiddling with you know, different setups and things, and you know, you can add sort of like indents into the walls and things of that nature. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Again, this is just, you know, for tutorial purposes, but you get the idea. Let's turn this down a little bit just so we don't, it's not so quite so obvious where this ends. I think I want one right here as well. And I don't want to make these too these passages too narrow because we still need to fit our character through, but they were 4 meters wide to begin with, which is quite wide for a doorway. So I'm not too worried about it. But just if you are, you know, adding things like columns into doorways, and your doorways are a little bit tighter than mine, you know, just make sure you're constantly playtesting to make sure that your level is still traversable, because it would be a shame, you know, to build out a beautiful prototype and then have your character not be able to move through it. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I like the ceiling height. I might add some more, you know, columns and interest off camera, but I think you get the idea for the most part. I might add one going across also, or maybe just one right here to sort of separate this area. So we're gonna have, when we get into prototyping our interactable items, we're gonna have sort of a health pickup right here, and that will make a little bit more sense when we get there. But so I think having this sort of area separated off visually with these beams is gonna make sense for this. But again, this is an iterative process. You know, you may do something and make some changes to your design later that sort of make those initial changes or those initial designs really no longer work, and don't be afraid to change them if that is the case. Okay, so let's move on. If you see this happen, this little red X on your light, that just means that you have too many different light objects that are overlapping with each other. There's a couple ways to fix this. You can lower your attenuation radiuses until the X goes away, but this may give you, you know, not desired lighting effects. You can, you know, delete one of these lights and move them around until, you know, you don't have quite so many overlapping. Or you can change these to movable lights. So we'll probably talk about this a little bit later when we get into lighting, you know, when we have our art pieces, but the mobility of your lights sort of affects how they work. By default, all lights are set to stationary in Unreal Engine. And if you hover over it, they'll give you a little brief description of what that means. But for our purposes at this level, if you see one with an X, you can just change it to movable. You'll get these little arrows instead. Movable lights are slightly more costly than stationary lights with regards to performance, but they are less costly than having too many stationary overlights overlapping with that X. You'll get some performance drops because the lighting is just now too complex to be calculated at runtime in an effective, efficient way. So, and you don't have to change them all. You can just change, you know, having one will sort of negate this this overlap effect. So we'll change the ones that were having issues to movable just for the time being. We'll fix it up a little bit more later, but so let's continue on. Away from here. Let's continue on into room 4. So same procedure here. We need to extend our pit down so it we can't see out of the world. You can see now we can even see sort of the exterior walls because we've extended them down so far in the previous room. So let's do that. Let's jump into unlit. Actually, no, because I'm not going to jump into unlit here because you'll see that it can be a little bit difficult to tell, you know, which is part of this room and which is part of this room. So let's stay in lit, actually. And again, this is why I separated out all my ceilings, because now I can, if I need to zoom out to see what I'm doing on a larger scale, I can come in here and just hide the ceiling. Oh. I'm just gonna select every piece along the perimeter. Okay, I'm gonna hold Alt and drag it down. And without clicking anything else, all that new geometry is still selected, so I could just hold Alt again and do it again. Oh, it does look like we missed a piece here. No worries, just come in and duplicate it down to match. Okay, let's see how this looks by right-clicking and pressing play from here. That looks pretty good. Let's go one more, just for good measure. Select all the way around. And we're gonna lose the gizmo, and we're gonna find it again, and there we go. Okay, let's add the floors, same way as we have been doing in the previous rooms. We'll just drag a floor in from our content browser, move it around to where we want it to be. There we go. We'll change the material here, and we'll throw this in the room 4 folder. And we'll just duplicate it up. Okay. So let's play from here again. Looks pretty good, except we can see the bottoms of our platforms here. So let's fix that. Again, I don't want to scale this way because even though with the prototype grid material we have applied, it appears to work fine. When we put our actual art asset in here, it's going to look stretched. So instead I'm just going to duplicate it down just like we've been doing with everything else. And as long as we set up our materials correctly, our textures to tile correctly, you will not notice any sort of seams or anything like that when we go to replace these. Okay, let's unhide our ceiling. Play from here again. Okay, that looks much better. But we're having the same issue here as we're having, or as we had in this room with the ceilings being too low. This was more for, well, this was partially for aesthetic reasons, and again, partially because we want, when we have our blocks come down here, we need to have them be raised up. But here, we don't have our blocks, but you'll notice that when we jump, our character's head is just almost touching the ceiling, which is, it's just not really what I want. So for the pieces that are over the pit, let's select all of these. 3, 4. Keep going. And one more. So let's select all of these and let's move them up by 4 meters. Yeah, I think 4. I had to contemplate whether or not I wanted to just move them 2. And, you know, you can move them 2, test it, and if it's not enough, move them 4. I'm just going to go for it and move them up 4 meters. I mean, we need to use the same wall pieces regardless of the height, so it doesn't matter really. Okay, so before we start adding columns and stuff, let's just give this room a quick play test. So we come in here, the ceiling is raised here, jump. That feels a lot better. It doesn't feel like we're gonna whack our head on the ceiling. Yeah, okay, so I'm happy with that. So let's start adding some columns in to break it up. I'm just gonna duplicate this one out straight so I don't have to rotate it. I'm just gonna check this corner. Even though it's hard to see with the lighting situation, I still want things to be aligned right in case the lighting situation changes. I don't want there to be, you know, suddenly these glaring errors in our build. Move to, I think where this is from 4, yeah. Okay. So we're still getting some Z fighting here, so we need to drop these lintel pieces down a little bit. That's what those are called, by the way. If you ever see these like sort of supports, these parts are called posts. These are lintels. Let's drop those down. Let's drop the posts down too. There we go. Great, no more Z fighting. That's what we like to see. Okay. Okay, let's see how it's looking in game. Right click, play from here. Okay, it's looking pretty good. The lighting is not great, but can also increase this value here, this indirect lighting intensity, and that's just going to fill out these darker points a little bit more, flooded with light. It's not very realistic as far as lighting goes if you're going for sort of a realism, but we're not going to be doing that, so I'm not worried about it. So I'm liking this, but I think I want to break it up even a little bit more and just add a few more levels to the ceiling. So instead of pulling this whole section up by 4 meters, I think what I'm going to do, let me have a think about this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this end and this end, and I'm going to pull them back down by just 2. So I'm lining them up with the grid here. And then I'm going to fill these gaps in as well. So I'm just going to duplicate out these walls. And again, this is not a functional thing. This is just purely a design aesthetic thing. So now when I look at it, there's a little bit more going on with the ceiling. It draws the eye upward a little bit, you know, and it emphasizes the height of the room. And also, sort of like a psychology thing, but because we're supposed to be jumping across this pit, having the ceilings mimic an arc of a jump is kind of like a sort of a subliminal clue to the player if they weren't sure how they were supposed to get across for some reason. Having things like that built into your level itself can be helpful with that kind of thing. So yeah, we have the ceiling sort of arc in a way that mimics the parabola of a jump. Which actually is probably worth doing in this room as well. It's probably more worth doing in this room where the jump mechanic is first being introduced to the player. We might have some issues with this, but let's test it out. I'm going off script here. That's 1 meter. That's 2 meters. Let's go up 1. And I've been sticking pretty strictly to this like 4 meter height increments, but you definitely don't need to. I don't recommend building off the grid at this stage. Keep your grid snapping on, but you know, when I raise the ceiling, I've been doing it by 4 meters, but you know, there's no reason that you can't raise it by 1 meter or 3 meters or whatever works for your level. Oops, I meant to duplicate that, not move it. Let's try that again. I know I'm going over this part really fast, but this is all literally just review. Again, it's totally fine to have these pieces sticking up in sort of this funny manner, as long as we know that we will never see them in game. There's some Z fighting happening here, though. Let me play from here to get a better idea of what's happening now that I've made all these changes. Okay, so we do have some Z fighting. We'll need to fix that. But here again, we have sort of the ceiling mimicking the arc of a jump. Which is sort of good feedback for players. All right. Okay, I'm gonna come back and fix, you know, these things off camera because it's literally just adding columns and moving them around. This recording is getting a little bit long, and I do want to finish the last section of the room here before I wrap it up. In the same way that we had our first room, we raised it up. I want to do the same thing here, because when I'm standing here as a player, I don't want to be able to see the end of the room here. I want there to be a little bit of a visual blocker here. So I'm going to raise this room up by 4 meters. So again, same thing. I'm going to open my outliner. Let's collapse some of these. This one is, oops, sorry. Just keeping things tidy here so I don't have a mess to deal with later. Okay, so let's open up room 5. I'm just going to select everything under room 5, which selects this whole box at the end here. I'm going to move it up. I'm going to make sure my snapping is correct by changing it to 100. And oops. If you Control Z, it will bring back your selection, which is really nice. And so if you accidentally, like if you take all the time to select something, you accidentally click outside of it, if you Control Z, it will bring your selection back in Unreal without making any other changes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's lined up now. And then same thing out here, we're gonna add the stairs and we're gonna probably dormer this roof out a little bit. So let's bring that up. We don't need this piece anymore because that's where the stairs are gonna go. And because we're staying really close to our grid snapping system, we can just use these same stairs that we did before. So we already have our stairs made, we can just drag them out, rotate them around so that they're facing the right way, and put it in place. And it's super simple. Okay. That. I'm gonna raise this one up by, I think, 2 meters is what I did before. Not sure. That should be fine now. 2. Okay, let me see how it looks from the opposite side of the room. Okay, so we see it's facing to a staircase. We now can't see the room there. We can still make it across fairly easily. And then we have this here. So we have a gap right there in the ceiling, which we'll fix just by extending these. Oops. Ooh. Sorry, the camera went a little crazy there. We'll extend these up. And of course I'll, add some columns to hide that Z fighting there. Okay. Tuck this in a little bit and scale it ever so slightly down so that we don't get that flickering effect. Okay. The last thing I'm going to add here, just for prototyping purposes, is I need to make it clear that this is the end of our level until we get our actual, our treasure chest and whatever else we're going to have in the final room, sort of the goal room. Until we get that there, I just want to mark down that this is the end of our level. And although I'm working on this solo, this is more practice for, if you were working on a team, you need to make it clear to other people what's going on. So the way I'm going to do that is with a text render object. So I'm just going to open the place actors and search text in the search box here. And that will give you this text render actor object here. So what you can do is you can just drag that into your level. And you'll get this sort of floating text here. So let's open our details panel. And I'm just going to type in end. And that will change the text in the level to whatever you type in right here. And I'm just going to scale it up just as a reminder to myself and anyone else working on this level that this is where our level ends. So I'll probably add a few more columns and, and things like that off camera. But I think you get the idea, so I don't really feel the need to go through it. But this is going to conclude our second pass for our prototyping. So again, it was mostly visual, a little bit of functional stuff with the ceilings, but mostly visual interest, adding variation. And for your own levels, you can, you can make several passes through a process like this, adding more things. You could add sort of, I don't know, recesses into the walls or make different sort of wall pieces that were a little bit more interesting. But for the purposes of this course, I think this is gonna do it for our second pass of prototyping build. So when we come back, we will still be prototyping, but we're gonna get into some more interesting stuff because we are going to start scripting some of the interactive elements in the game, such as the falling blocks and the fire and all the traps and interactive parts, that is really going to make this more of a game. So that will be when we come back, and I will see you all in the next video.